Get a bigger table for them over there. Bill, I think Bill needs a bigger table there. He's like squished.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody in attendance this evening. First item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next item on the agenda is audience comments. So I'm not sure how many people have signed up, but
okay, we have only one presenter or speaker tonight, and that is Kay Nyman.
Got it, Kay. Here's my notes.
I've always wanted to be a keynote speaker.
no chance.
I'm Kay Nyman, and I know that we've been asked the last couple board meetings to move on, and yes, we need to do that eventually, but I'm going to do some we told you so tonight. Okay. And glad Channel 15 is here because last week they did an interview with I thought it was a Parkview pediatric nurse, but I guess it was a nurse practitioner or something from Purdue University. But they were, and the Parkview nurse did explain that RSV is up. Their beds have tripled this year as opposed to past years. And they are having to utilize other parts of the hospital to accommodate this. Now, in the interview, and again, I can't remember if it was the one from Purdue or the Parkview medical person, but the explanation given was the masks for 2 years, the being quarantined, if you not quarantined, but sequestered, lockdowns and stuff, had literally, and we told you every other week, killing the immune system of people. The children were not allowed to breathe in the pathogens that they normally would have in normal years, which would allow them to build up immunity. And that's why we see a triple rise in RSV, and flu's up too. So that's just, going forward, let's look backwards in case this happens again. The mask didn't really do us any good. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. We've got 2 sets of minutes to approve, an executive session and a regular board meeting minutes of the meeting held on November 14. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Slaughter, second by Mr. Summers. Any discussion? All in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Turn the meeting over to Superintendent Barker.
Thank you, President Felger. Good evening, members of the board. It's good to see you. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving weekend and enjoyed some time with family and friends. Want to bring to your attention tonight some changes that we've been discussing for a little bit of time, changes to the agenda format. We're making some changes to that starting in this meeting tonight, and we're doing that for a few reasons. Number one, we have a really talented central office leadership team that I want you to be able to hear from more on a regular basis. They're doing good work in our district, and I think it would be good for them to be able to present that work directly to you instead of sometimes me or a few others maybe presenting work on their behalf. And part of that also goes in line with the superintendent goals that were established with the board for the superintendent and what you'll be using to evaluate me in terms of trying to build and mentor leadership capacity of our fellow central office leaders. So you're going to see that as a change to our agenda. You're also going to notice that there will be a background statement included with many of the agenda items. Again, this is something that I'm used to doing in my past, and I think it'll be a good way for us to continue to our goals of building transparency and building trust, and doing things in a public way. So you'll see that tonight in the agenda. You'll see names beside agenda items for those things that they're actually responsible for. And that will start with your next agenda item. In the past, I've taken those human resource personnel recommendations to you, but it seems more appropriate that our director of HR would do that. So that'll be the first change, and you'll see some others as we go through the agenda.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Barker. Speaking of personnel items, I'll turn the meeting over to Sam DePremio.
Thank you. Good evening. Just quick point of clarity. Mr. Barker mentioned the talented central office leadership that will be coming. That will be happening following myself in my presentation. So again, good evening. I'll be referencing the personnel section of your packet. The highlighted recommendations include 7 classified recommendations, 2 certified recommendations, and 2 extracurricular recommendations. It is recommended that items A through F of the personnel report be approved as presented.
Do we have a motion to approve?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Summers, second by Mrs. Slaughter. Any discussion?
Have we started on resignations? We started gathering intel a little bit, working with them just to understand reasons. I know there was instructional assistance, but still, I know that that's a pretty fluid group and things like that. Sometimes getting full permanent employment elsewhere. But have we've been checking into why people are leaving in certain areas.
Agree. Most of the time, their letter of resignation gives us some clarity. Sometimes it does not. It is one of my goals to really implement a sound exit interview process that goes into some of those things, and trying to devise a way that can be done so that they feel free to give honest, open answers.
That's the only way we're going to find if there's a root cause or if it's just transitional, right? I mean, most.
Sure. Yep.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, there being none, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Okay, we'll move into curriculum, instruction, and technology with Dr. Toller.
Good evening. Professional learning and training activities this evening. We have just a few requests for some training. A few points of clarity. The third quest training being recommended by our special ed director for 2 of our special education teachers. Third quest training is actually a program to help with secondary students and adults who still struggle with reading. So it's reading remediation for older students, which is an area we're finding we need to make some improvements. And then secondly, I apologize, we had a last minute addition. We discovered over the weekend that there's going to be an Indiana School Board Association School Law Seminar here in town on December 9th, which is before our next school board meeting. So we did include that in the agenda for tonight, so I just wanted to point that out before I ask for approval. So having stated that, it is recommended that professional learning and training activities be approved as presented.
Do we have a motion to approve?
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Slaughter, second by Mr. Barkus. Any discussion? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Next up, we have 1 field trip request for tonight, and that is from Hickory Center for the 4th grade. And they're requesting to visit Indianapolis at the State Museum and the Indiana State House.
Motion to approve.
Approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Summers, second by Mr. Barkus. Any discussion? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? field trip request is approved.
And then finally, this evening, I just have an update about our science textbook adoption process. We started the process almost at the very beginning of the school year. The secondary teachers typically meet as a group, and the elementary teachers meet as a group. Just because they're very, especially in the area of science, there's very different approaches between those two groups. Certainly we'll come together and have some discussion, K through 12, on what that looks like. So we start that process by first addressing, trying to take an inventory of what our needs are and how well our last adoption served us, and the current materials we have. And the next step, which is where we currently are in the process, is to hear from the vendors and see what's available, and have discussions as a district with our people within the district about our current technology resources, how much do we need to adopt an outside resource. And so those are all discussions that the teachers are having right now. And the hope is after winter break, we can come together and get some input, hopefully from our school board and from parents and community members before we move forward with the process later in the spring, bring it to you for approval. So that's where we are now. We're kind of assessing our needs and where we are and what's available. And it's always an odd process because there's always been this textbook caravan in the past where historically people would go and look at what's available when it was all hard copies. And that doesn't happen until January, which is kind of an okay process anyhow, but that was too late. We have to have these conversations before January and be making some decisions, so we have time to make a decision as a school district before the end of the school year and get things ordered if we need to for next school year. So that's just an update on where we are right now.
I know it's early, but how do you envision selecting members of the parents group? I'm just asking. I'm curious.
I don't know that answer yet. I think we need good representation and people that can share their thoughts with us. I think we've got our teachers are doing a great job, and I would hope for our teachers is to not waste parents' money, for the school district's money. That's one of the reasons we're looking at open-end resources, because we don't want to adopt something, have buyer's remorse, and then a year later wish we wouldn't have adopted whatever we did, and now we're charging parents for that for 6 years. And so the big goal is just to make sure that whatever the options the teachers want to recommend or really get closer look through, they just want to be sure it's useful and valuable. And for elementary, it's a whole different animal as well. It's something that's not enrichment, it's part of our state standards, but there's so much emphasis on literacy and math at the elementary level that science and when science is taught is a very different conversation compared to those two subjects. I think when the time comes, we're going to have to take a look at how we can get some input and some feedback on what our teachers are recommending and move forward from there.
So in your gap analysis, have you found any major that haven't been met by the materials we've had so far, or it's looking pretty good so far?
There have definitely, and especially at the secondary level, we have such a variety of materials that we've adopted. There have definitely been teachers in subject areas that have been happier than others with the last adoption. Now, having said that, that's the teachers brought up themselves the idea that maybe we need to consider not adopting an actual book and going to open-ended resources, because some of them have been doing it the last 2 years, as they've been trying to fill those gaps and finding their own material and finding better material. We also have to be careful about copyright, and want to be sure we have good resources for our kids. So I think they've been very deliberate and thoughtful in their approach, and they're trying to collect as much information as possible, because they have to live with the decision as well for the next several years. So.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. Okay. Time for superintendent's report.
Our first item in the superintendent's report is our planning response for the NACS enrollment projections. At our last two board meetings, as you know, we had Dr. McKibben here, and his enrollment projections are included from November 4th from his presentation. And then we've also included, again, the spreadsheet showing the heat maps for the potential areas where we're going to have issues with increasing enrollment. Tonight, we just want to give you kind of a verbal update on where we're at in that process. Basically, we have contacted Moak Park. You know, the first key takeaway prioritized by Dr. McKibben was in dealing with the middle school issues. So we contacted Moak Park. They obviously know Carroll Middle School and Maple Creek very well as being the principal designers of those buildings. And we asked them to think of the three options that we discussed in our last meeting and to come to our next school board meeting on December 12th and present to you information related to intermediate school possibilities, addition renovations to the current schools and what that would look like, and then also a third middle school option. So Moak Park will be here at our next school board meeting to discuss that with you and kind of look at that in a little more detail than us just generally having a conversation about it as we did the last meeting. Second priority that was given from Dr. McKibben was to discuss how we're going to accommodate 500 students that are coming to Carroll High School. And so again, there we've contacted Barton Covillama Architects. They've been involved in all of the addition renovation projects at Carroll High School for a long time now, and they know Carroll High School very well. And we're going to be meeting with them to talk about possibilities for how we can accommodate that enrollment projection and have them also then at some point come in and present that to you. I don't think that will be at the next board meeting. That will probably be sometime maybe in January. So I think you can expect to hear from Moak Park in the next meeting regarding our middle schools, maybe Barton Covillama at a meeting in January. And then also we intend to move forward with just some discussions and bringing options to you concerning a potential new central office space to capture backspace for Perry Hill Elementary, which can help us to delay any elementary additions that we need to make, and then also to accommodate really the school district for the next 50 years. I think it was Mr. President Felger who in our last meeting talked about this space looking very much the same since 1974 in many ways. So
I wasn't here then.
No, you were here much after, much later than that.
High School.
So anyway, that's kind of where we're at. I don't have anything really concrete to report to you, but I think at our next meeting, you can expect to have a little more detailed information concerning those options for middle schools. And then we can ask questions of Moak Park and have more of a conversation.
Were we able to get, thank you very much. Were you able to get from Dr. McKibben the projections by subdivision material? Were we able to?
I still don't have that at this point in time.
But he does have that, the way he broke it down.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I got to get in touch with him.
I'm thinking as we've talked about potentially having to redistrict some of the elementary schools, especially if we know where the right growth is. I mean, there are other tools, but his projections are the more important piece, obviously.
Right.
Where we know we're overflowing in this school or that school, making sure we make the changes as we need to there. So
Right.
that was the third leg of this stool, or fourth leg, I guess, of the chair.
Right. If he has that, we'll provide that information to you. I think there's definitely considerations that we need to make even sooner than later, quite honestly, about redistricting to ease some of that crowding that we're going to have at Aspen Meadow and maybe use Eel River, especially in neighborhoods that don't currently have any houses developed in them yet. Some changes we can make.
Okay, is that the end of your report?
Yes, that was the only one on the planning response. I can go into strategic planning if you're ready. The next item regarding our strategic planning initiative, is also something that really came out of our superintendent goals that the board developed with me after going through that first 90 days plan that we worked through. And we came up with the concept of using strategic planning for a few things. Number one, to create a North Star, to create a path for where we want our school district to be in the next 5, 10 years, and looking at that. And then also using that process really to create a way for us to build trust by collecting input from our stakeholders. I think that by itself is a valuable reason for us to do this, to be able to do that. So one of the goals that was created for me that you will be evaluating me on is to lead the district through a strategic planning process that includes all of our community stakeholders. So we plan to do that, and we plan to do that with a company that I want you to meet with tonight that are here to present to you, and they're called Education Elements. They're an education consulting firm that since 2010 has worked with 200 districts across the country, or 950 schools across the United States. And that's also including school districts in Indiana. And just so you are aware, I have vetted this company and their work with Indiana superintendents that they have been working with. And they come to us very highly recommended. And I've been pleased with the feedback that I've heard from my colleagues across the state, and then also with the work that they've been able to get as a result of their partnerships with Education Elements. They're a team of former educators, teachers, coaches, principals, district administrators, data experts, and they've all been committed to improving student outcomes. They emphasize integrating community beliefs and feedback into actionable priorities for the organization. So with us tonight is Andrea Getchus and Allie Weiss, and I'm going to ask them to come forward and present information to you about what a potential partnership with Education Elements would look like if we decide to move forward with a proposal that they have for us regarding a strategic planning process that we could start now, begin the work in December, and move forward to having a strategic plan in place by the end of the summer for the start of this upcoming school year. So thank you for your efforts to be with us tonight. I know you both have traveled distances to be with us, so I'll turn it over to you at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for having us tonight. My name is Andrea Getchus, as Mr. Barker shared. I have been with Education Elements for 6.5 years now, but prior to that was a special education teacher, instructional coach, and over the past 3 years have been working really dedicating my time to work in Indiana. So just a little bit about that while the slides are coming up. In addition to the work that we do nationally, we've been building some really deep relationships with the Indiana's Association of Public School Superintendents and the Indiana School Boards Association. So we work very closely with leaders across the state to make sure that we have a pulse on exactly what's happening in your state. We might have some technical difficulties, but that's totally fine. You all have the slides with you, so I will share. Let me share a little bit about Education Elements, so you hear a little bit about what we bring. So Education Elements, like Mr. Barker shared, is a consultancy that works across 4 main areas. The first is instructional implementation and design. That's where we do large-scale change management with instructional strategies in mind. The second is organizational strategy, which is what we're talking about today, strategic planning. And the third is leadership development. Oh, cute picture. Is leadership strategy and development, where we do dedicated support and professional development for leaders. And then the last is our data services. But as you can imagine, all of those things influence one another. We incorporate our skills in leadership development in the work that we do in organizational strategy. And that is something that we
did check this around 5:45.
Yeah, we
and
did. We
and it
totally
was working
did. It was
fine.
working fine.
Murphy's Law. Yeah, yeah.
noted strategic planning initiative. Yeah. We know it worked this way. It just
Show better.
There we go. All right, we're in business. So I will let my colleague Allie introduce herself in a moment when she shares a little bit about the work in Indiana that we have done. But over the past few months, we've been in conversation with Mr. Barker and some of you in understanding what the needs are in Northwest Allen. So we know that you have your enrollment is increasing, you have a change in leadership. There's a lot of opportunity in this change. And so we know that strategic planning is work that can be incredibly valuable during this time. We also have a pulse on what's going on across the state and the country. So we know that teacher burnout is something that many districts are struggling with. We also realize that as you all are seeing an increase in enrollment, we're seeing a decline in enrollment across the country because people are having many different options for where they send their students. We know in particular, you feel that very acutely in Indiana with the voucher program that's going on. You want to make sure that you are the choice for the students in your community. Your families have a choice. We want to make sure that they're choosing Northwest Allen. So why do we do the work that we do? We believe the strategic planning, the alternative is often not doing it or doing it ineffectively. And part of that is because of how you can engage your community. We believe in shifting from the traditional way of strategy work in creating a strategy, developing priorities, and then communicating that and investing in your community. We want to kind of flip that on its head, and we want to make sure that we're creating and investing folks throughout. So we're working with our community to make sure that what they're asking for, the feedback that they're providing, the solutions that they're proposing are implemented in the plan. We think that that's important for two reasons. First, it builds trust, and second, it means that you're building momentum throughout the process. Not only are you ready to go when your plan is finalized, you have leaders and individuals within your community that are ready to do this work. So a few beliefs, and Mr. Barker shared a little bit about this, but I'll go over them pretty quickly. The first thing that we believe in strategic planning is that we must engage many perspectives, and we don't just consult and ask for feedback, but we include folks in these conversations because we want to make sure that we're making the plan with them and for them, so for all of you. We also believe that feedback is wonderful, but we want to engage our community in the feedback and design of the plan. Like I said before, that ensures that we have high buy-in and low friction. And it really means that folks are co-creators of the solutions, which brings us to the next piece. We think about planning in terms of sprints. I'll talk a little bit about our phases of work and making sure that we're breaking down the work that you have to do to develop your priorities, develop the initiatives or programs that you want to take on, but that you're developing a plan that is ready to pivot. So something I like to say is we want to build you a plan or build with you a plan that will last, but not that it will stay the same. We want to make sure that you can adjust and adapt your approach based on the new information that you're getting. The last piece is communicating clearly and consistently. So we want to make sure that throughout this process, we're providing updates to your community. We're ensuring that your staff, your students, community members at large are understanding the process and seeing their beliefs integrated into the plan. So as you can imagine, the alternative to this is why strategic plans aren't successful. And so we want to make sure that we're avoiding some of these pitfalls, making sure that your plans are accessible. Sometimes what happens with strategic plans is they're built in a small group with really great intentions, but it's difficult for others to interpret. The other thing we want to avoid is the one and done. We want to make sure that you're not just creating a plan that's rarely referenced, but that it becomes the heartbeat of your organization. The last piece is making sure that we're avoiding an actionable plan. We want to make sure that it is specific enough to take action on, but broad enough that folks can see themselves in different parts of the plan. And we really believe that your plan should represent the identity of your community. We know best practices around strategic planning. What you see on this slide are the components of a strong strategic plan, often what people include. The far left column are some of those common components that you see: mission, vision, values, priorities, goals. On the far right column, you'll see other names. I know I heard you say North Star. That could potentially be the term that you all use in Northwest Allen. But we want people to understand the alternatives, and we want to know why they exist. So while many people adopt these components into their plans, we want to make sure people understand why they're there. So I haven't had anybody say we don't want to do a mission or a vision, but they definitely know why. And they even go through the conversation of a vision is what helps us move forward. A mission is what we do. As you can see, these are some samples of strategic plans that we have built. All of those components are represented in all of these plans in different ways, but as you can see, the identity, the personality, the characteristics of the organizations are uniquely implemented into the design of our plan. We have a team, our marketing team develops all of these plans to make sure that they follow any branding that you all have, and we're asking thorough questions to make sure that it's representing the personality of your organization. So with that, as you can imagine, we're trying to run you through a tried and true process, but also develop a plan that is unique to you. So I want to talk a bit about our community approach, and Allie's going to share a bit about how we engage.
It is a pleasure to be with you in Fort Wayne. I drove up from Indianapolis, where I live, this afternoon, and actually used to run the student teaching seminar. I taught at IU for 8 years, in addition to teaching in public schools in Indianapolis. And so it is a privilege and a joy to be doing work in Indiana, and want to share what that's looked like in some of our strategic planning processes throughout the state. So to illustrate what this really looks like, Andrea has taken us through what the process or methodology looks like, but what it really feels like is really engaging the entire community in the process. And so we do that in a number of ways that we have researched and implemented and learned from throughout the country over many years. We like to utilize a variety of community engagement activities such as surveys, focus groups, town halls, forums, to really hear the voices and perspectives and experiences of those who are most impacted, starting with the students, but making sure to engage the entire community, even those who don't have students currently in the district, but are impacted by the work in the district. Throughout our process, we've developed these domains that are really aligned to a strategic plan. We know that there's a lot of data that you collect in a school district on a regular basis. We also know that there are specific things that strategic plans do, and there are other things that are really the responsibility of others or accountability of individual leaders as opposed to the entire district, kind of as a North Star. And so these domains that we've developed are really aligned to what a strategic plan uniquely does for a school and for a school district. And in that process, we've aligned our work, all of our community engagement activities, to ensure that we are able to really collect data and triangulate to understand what experiences are and how to make that data really actionable as we develop a strategic plan. What I really love about our process and what I think makes us unique is that when we talk about community engagement, that happens multiple times along the process. We're engaging the community in the data collection process, but also the steering team who's helping to really develop this work as a partner will review data together. We facilitate that process. We share the best practices we learn, but it's really about the community digging into the data, understanding the purpose of collecting the data, and understanding how that informs any decisions that are made and the plans moving forward. What you can see is that we use both qualitative and quantitative methods to understand the unique perspectives of those within the district, and we really rely heavily on utilizing what we know about the community to develop those plans, both for community engagement and the analysis that leads us to our planning process. And Andrea will talk about the design process itself.
So there's kind of two halves, and we talked about the different phases. I'll go into detail in a moment, but the first part of engaging the community is in that initial feedback, understanding the experience of your community members. The second half is related to collaborating and designing together. So the two beliefs that I shared previously around sprints and communicating often, here are some frameworks or ideas that we use in our design thinking. So the first piece is incorporating this idea of divergent and convergent thinking. Something that skilled facilitators on our team do are managing and supporting the team in going, opening up all the possibilities, thinking of all of the different ways that you can solve for the challenges or for the needs in your organization. And then the next piece is converging and thinking about making some choices. How are we making decisions between some really fantastic options? And how are we aligning that to our North Star, our vision? The second piece that we uniquely support our organizations in is prototyping. So thinking about building out initiatives just enough for it to be tangible for your team. So we build things out just enough to say, if we want to build a community center, how much will it cost? Who will be involved? Do we have to hire new people? Do we have a building that already exists? How do we build it out just enough to say that's the thing that we want to take on? And then the last piece is we help you narrow those decisions. What is ambitious and feasible for your organization? So some of the information that you all were sharing related to curriculum implementation or the enrollment shifts, those would all be things that we would consider in your initiatives and say, what is the big picture? What is the full picture of your organization? And what is the most prudent choice to make for your organization? So the next few slides, I'm going to pause after this one just to answer any questions, but I want to show you a quick 10,000 feet view of the work that we do. We organize our work into 4 phases. Plan and Align is focused on developing the framework for the project. Who are on the different teams? What's the project calendar? How might we engage with folks for community engagement? In Foundations, we move into the community engagement time, which included in the proposal is a survey and 8 focus groups. And then afterwards, in between that time, we do a readout. We organize the data so that it is manageable for the team to interpret and understand. We have a session in person where we debrief the community engagement activities, and then we start thinking about the visioning, mission, what we call a strategic direction, the big picture. Then we shift into design, where we first do what I shared about the divergent thinking, opening up possibilities. We bring in community members. We bring a new group of folks to help with that solution creation. And then on that second design day, we help you narrow the focus, prototype those options a little bit more. In launch, we help you think through prioritization, communication, and then we support with the design of your marketing, the PDF. So we believe that the plan is that PDF, but more than that, it's how you communicate it out. How do you plan for implementation? Who's going to take on the different initiatives? How are we going to monitor our plan and make sure that we're following through on what we've committed to? You'll notice that the timelines here are both hybrid. So we do some virtual support and some in-person support. It's what we've found to be the best way to do a cost-effective plan, but also a way to really engage folks. We found that having virtual options makes it accessible and available for people to do community engagement, but those design or foundation sessions are really important to do in person. The last thing I'll leave you with, sorry, I promised you that I was going to stop at the last slide, but I'll leave you with this and then we can do questions. When you work with education elements, you get so much more than a plan. You get 2 team members who really become a part of your organization. They're highly invested. We have you all on speed dial. You have us on speed dial. We're thinking about the important aspects of the work together. So we build capacity. We think through strategy and change management. And as a result, your team will be able to do that. We are really strong facilitators and project managers. We are making sure that you're sticking to that timeline, even when things are unpredictable, when things always come up in school organizations. And then the last piece is that coaching and capacity building. Your team will be stronger after work. working together on this and doing this, I like to say, a really strong group project together. It'll feel like you've been through a really great experience. And your leaders will start to emerge. So the following slides are just a few details related to the individual touch points, some project governance items that you can kind of scroll through. I'm happy to talk through them, but I wanted to pause here and see what questions you all have, or if there's anything we can clarify.
Anybody have any questions?
So overall, it looks to be like 8 to 9 months, approximately-ish.
We do 6 to 9,
Okay.
we recommend. Okay. And actually, this timeline was with the timeline we were thinking about in mind to be wrapped up in, May or June of 2023.
Prior to next.
Yeah, so you can ready to launch your plan in the fall.
I sat through the private presentation, so I've had a lot of my questions answered, but
Yeah.
I guess I'll just reiterate a couple things. One, my challenge, make sure it's not a cookie cutter. I wanted to see some, I was able to see, and they weren't the same. I also want to make sure that, it's not a fluff piece, what gets measured is what gets done, right? And that's an important piece of that. So it should be reflective of those things and should be able to hold various individuals, including the board, accountable on what comes out of the strategic plan. It should be helpful from that perspective. It seems like it's long past due of having a well thought out strategic plan, especially given the growth issues, funding issues, a lot of the other components. So, I mean, generally speaking, I always have a skepticism in general, but anyway, it's worth a challenge, but it's part of the discussion, right? It's the challenge. I guess I would ask, you had mentioned to me that there are different roles within the process, and you've seen boards be involved from, I don't know if you're getting ready for that or not, but at the, really hands-on dirty versus project sponsorship. What has been your experience? Which one is the most effective at? I go back and think about when we did the redistricting, right? I think some groups, when we had board members on them, people kind of turn to the board members. What do you want? Well, it's not what we want, it's what you want.
Yeah.
And so I just give you my initial impression is, as a sponsor, you want to make sure it's going in the direction you want it, generally speaking, but you kind of keep, nose in, fingers out on that part of the process. You let the team, put the team in place, you let them do the work, and then you get updated as it comes through. And I just, what has been your experience, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, you said no cookie cutter, so my answer is not going to be cookie cutter because it really depends. It depends on what you need in your community. And I think a few things to think about. At a minimum, we believe that you all should be informed throughout the process. None of this should feel like a surprise at the end. So included in our proposal are executive summaries and making sure that there are slides that represent the progress that's been made at each of those phases. We have seen, it really depends on the dynamic, but representation, we've had a board member attend and be a part of the steering team, and then they're responsible for bringing it back to the board. The consideration there is it's a big lift. It's a time commitment for that individual. The next piece is ratification, where maybe we're doing more working sessions. So that's something that we can add to the proposal and think about either education elements or your team leading something at board meetings that, where you're at every phase of the work, you're providing some input as well and saying, we like this, we heard this, or you're kind of doing a pared down version of what we're doing with the larger teams. And then the last piece is just approval throughout. Some folks really want to be hands off and they trust the process. Some people really, because we're working in unifying a message, want to make sure that we have everybody present. I know that's not the perfect answer.
That's fine. That's fine. It depends.
Yeah.
Surprise me.
Mr. Summers and Mrs. Hathaway did have the opportunity to meet with Andrea and some of our team prior to Thanksgiving, and we met, I don't know, maybe a couple hours, and had a lot of time for dialogue and questions. And, I'm open to what the board wants in terms of this involvement. I do think Kent's point about nose in, fingers out makes a lot of sense, even from my perspective, because what I want to make sure is we're leading a process that truly solicits feedback, because we want the feedback from the community and we don't want to direct the feedback. And then will be our job to create a plan that reacts to that feedback. That's how I see it being effective. That's how I see it working, especially here, knowing what has happened over the last few years. And I think it's a good way for us to get feedback. And if the community feels like it's a truly open way to do that, that seems like a good way for us to build trust and be able to move forward.
A lot of the survey question, there's a lot of survey material. I think at the end, there's a lot of data. And I can't remember the answer to this on here, so I apologize. At the end of the whole process, do we own that data? In other words, I know we're anonymity of people who are wanting to be anonymous, but will we be able to see, it really, look at the detail? Like you said, we'll be able to approach students, we'll be able to approach teachers, we'll be able to approach parents and community members. So it'll be these various subcategories, and it'd be interesting to see perspectives and different views of those things. Great to boil it down, but also I like to get the details sometimes. So
yeah, I'll take the first pass, but Allie, this is actually her bread and butter. But the first thing I'll say is we run all of our surveys through Qualtrics, so
yep.
You will get a login. So we will synthesize it, because what we don't want to happen when we do the readout is for folks to feel really overwhelmed. So we try and not curate, but we try and organize it so it feels like we can direct our attention and shine lights on different areas. But we do provide the login, because what ends up happening is folks will say, well, I'm really curious about the breakdown between middle school and high school teachers, and what does it look like with elementary students versus middle school students. And when you all start getting curious, we really want to make sure that you own that and have that. We provide anonymized focus group and free response. We don't interpret your free response from the survey, but we can provide that all to you.
You put it, it'd be answered within a given domain, right? So we know the general area
Right.
for which it applies. Okay.
Yeah, and the design of the survey is a census survey, and so we can't extrapolate to all, but it does give us the ability to understand based on the demographic information that people can choose to fill in. It is optional. How much of the information they give us, it gives us an opportunity to segment the data and understand by groups, and we give that all to you. And we really do work together to develop a process, because we understand that we're gathering the community to interpret the data. We want to make sure that data literacy doesn't impact someone's ability to engage. So we're very thoughtful about how we share the data in the process, but we make sure you have access to your data.
Well,
And I'm sorry I wasn't able to be at the meeting, but I guess looking at it from the board's perspective, or maybe the superintendent's perspective, if somebody in the community asks us, because the cost is not insignificant, how is this going to help Northwest Down County Schools or help the community? How can we answer that question without using a bunch of educational jargon, that, the average person like myself can understand?
Yeah, I go back to the analogy of a really strong group project, and it's for a few reasons. The first is I think it gets everyone speaking in the same language, so using the same terms and making sure that when I say success, does that mean the same thing as it means to you? And what does that look like in the vision of the organization? So it helps make decisions down the line. And a few things that I've seen strategic plans inform people's budget. So making sure that you're aligning your budget with the priorities that you've identified. It helps you make sure that you're, when decisions become tough, this is the tiebreaker. So you think about our values are, a sense of belonging and community. And if we're trying to make a decision on maybe the school buildings that you're thinking about building, what's the deciding factor? Which decision makes us more aligned to our core values and beliefs? So it really helps you work unified in the things that matter, but then it also makes sure that we're empowering folks to do their individual jobs. In terms of the investment, because I recognize that it's a big investment of finances, resources, and your time, which is the most valuable thing. You all could probably have the capacity to do this on your own, but we do this every single day, and we're doing this with organizations across the country, making sure that we're bringing you the tried and true methods. Something that you'll see, even this board presentation, you've seen a few different versions of this in the last 3 weeks, because as we've been talking about it, it's improved, and we've been thinking about the different aspects that are important to you. So that's what you get when you work with us. Your team also gets professional development through this work. A lot of the quotes, and I wish I had included that as well, is just working together has made people feel like it was their own professional growth and development as leaders, to make sure that they can lead this process moving forward. So you're investing in capacity building, you're investing in being able to be participants in this work as well, because you could lead this work, like I said, but it's different when you're the one who has to facilitate it and bring it to fruition. And yeah, it's an investment in your community as well, making sure that their voices are heard.
I think the only other thing that I would add is that in our ability to both help learn how to do the community engagement ways that are really powerful, it also gives opportunities for you to take a step back sometimes and build trust and transparency in the process when you have someone else coming in who can help to bring the message and make sure it's loud and clear. And we found that to be really powerful.
Yeah, I don't mean to be skeptical, and I'm really not at all. But I've guess maybe I'm just getting reflective in my last couple of meetings being on the school board. But I've been here a while, and I remember my first year on the board. There was a study released, "A Nation at Risk," which was basically a clarion call that the nation's educational system was, not keeping up with other countries. And sometimes I ask myself if we really answered that call, or, I think, maybe that's got nothing to do with your presentation, but that's something that I think we all need to be mindful of, what the end result of being an educator is.
So when you say community, you're speaking of business owners, parents,
Parents,
not
family
just
members, students, teachers, staff that classified, certified, district leaders, school leaders,
everybody in the
everybody.
community. Okay.
Yeah, we just call it community members or constituents, folks who are invested in the work.
Where were you guys 2 years ago?
I don't know. Where were we? We were all in our homes on Zoom meetings.
Everybody wanted a survey. Everybody wanted a survey.
Barker, I got a question or comment. One of your previous roles as superintendent, you did this on your own, correct? And can you tell me the positives and negatives of doing it on your own? And I think I know the answer to this, but we wouldn't have these folks here. Why you wouldn't want to follow that process this time?
Yeah, it's a good question. In a previous district, I did do this on my own. I created our strategic plan. I created our mission, vision, goals. We then plastered them all over our boardroom, and we referred to them, and they still remain there today. And they still talk of those same things that guide decisions in that school district. I talk to their superintendent a lot, and it's worked well there. Part of the reason that I could do that was I had a lot of trust in that community. At most school board members, at most school board meetings, people referred to me as coach, and they came in and they trusted me. And if I said we need to go this way for this reason, for the most part, people believe that. And I don't think, to answer your question here, that we can do it the same way. I think we need company like Education Elements to be able to come in. This is a large district and a lot has happened, and we need to be sensitive to that, but we also need, in a way to move forward, make sure we've learned from the things that we have heard from people, and that is they want to give us their feedback, and we should solicit it. We should want their input, and they should be a part of this process. I would not be qualified in any way in my short time here to say this is our North Star and this is where we're going. It was easier when I'd spent 14 years in a place before even starting that, and it was small. So it's just very different. But I think that experience, to your question, leads me to wanting to work with Education Elements. They do come highly recommended on all the things that that I just spoke to, but also I think there is a benefit that we'll get to a team that we have here as a central office team that's pretty new working together. It will enable us to learn to work together better, and I think create a plan for us to be able to use the strategies in which we work together over those 9 months will probably be similar to the strategies that we'll work together with over the next 5 to 10 years. And that lives way beyond whatever the document is when we're done at the end of this 9 months, that points us in a direction as a district, which I'm excited about. I don't want to minimize that. That's a big part of what we want to come out of this. But the secondary benefit to not just our staff, but I think to telling our community, we heard you, you want to give us input, you want to give us feedback. We actually want your feedback. We want to know what the journey of a learner looks like from kindergarten through 12th grade for a Northwest Allen County student. What do parents want that to look like? What do our stakeholders want that to look like? What do people who live in our community who no longer have children want that to look like? What do they want from our schools? And I think the only way we can truly get that is to work with a neutral party. And it is a large amount of money. I mean, it is. And Andrea can tell you, I've pushed back on her more about that and what are we gaining from this, more than I have anything else probably. But when I say that, and what I've learned and what I've learned from other superintendents, what I believe that's an investment that our district can make and should make. And relative to our budget, I mean, the cost of this proposal is $98,000, just over that. In terms of our budget, Mr. Mallers, what is the total cost of our budget? Everything combined, 80?
We're in the 80s.
80 million dollar budget. I mean, this is a large organization. And while I think that is a significant amount of money, as others have said up here, I think it's, we have a large budget. There are 1,200 employees here. There are 8,200 students here. To think about creating a North Star strategic plan for a district our size, it's going to take an investment to be able to get the data that we need and the feedback that we need from others to be able to do that. And when you think of that cost relative to our entire budget, that's a small amount compared to the total budget. But it's taken me some time to get there myself, to work through that, because that's not something that I had experience with. But in talking with others, they have found that to have been a very much worthwhile investment in their districts. Long answer to your question.
Good answer.
And I think we've talked about with McKibben study, if we don't get it right, those numbers could be going in the opposite direction. This is an opportunistic view. It'd actually be higher if we do this right. I've used the phrase before, I'm not afraid of school choice because I want us to be the school of choice. And we come here instead of using vouchers to go to some other location. So I think that's fair and fine approach to think about it that way. And it's a hard bite at that apple, but
you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt Yeah, I guess I will. I'll make a motion, what the hell's actually very phrased here. Yeah, I recommend that the next strategic planning initiative proposal with education elements be approved as presented.
Okay,
But probably ought to be very clear, the total cost, and that's an all-in cost, if I remember correctly, you said, is $98,575. And I'll ask one more question before I make the formal approval or recommendation. Bill, this is fine within our operating, I mean, this is out of the operating fund and.
Yeah, this is something that was not in the 2023 budget. However, we are going to have appropriation remaining in our 22
we could pay some of it
budget
this year.
that I believe we'd be able to carry that forward with that appropriation. Yeah. Out of the operations fund, yes.
I want to make sure I ask that question before I spend money.
okay,
All right, I'll make the recommendation then, Ron.
okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Slaughter. Any discussion?
Is this something that we can maybe table and then talk to about with the board or?
Well, I thought about that, and I mean, I even think there's some merit. There's a gentleman in the audience that's going to be sitting in this chair in a couple weeks. But I understand that what did you say, that would like kick this down the road another 6 months?
No, it just, in order for us to be able to have a plan that we can kick off for the start of the next school year, that's where the timing of this comes from. But certainly, Mr. Vogt will end up being a part of this process as a future board member as we work our way through it. But the timing of it in that 6 to 9 month plan was to try to be able to have it so that we are kicking it off for the start of the next school year. It's not something that we can discuss really as an executive session.
Right,
There's
right.
the things that we've said here publicly are the same things that Mr. Summers and Mrs. Hathaway heard. You just, to your point, Mr. Marcus, you haven't had as much time as some others to interact with it. But that is
thrown at me today.
Yeah.
I don't disagree. We do need everyone's input. In fact, that would be much easier than 5 of us trying to
Exactly.
make the decision for the whole community.
Right.
I value your input a lot, Wayne, I really do. So,
Yeah. This is in line with, really, and it's not education elements. It certainly wasn't even when we created it as a goal for the board to evaluate me as the superintendent for strategic planning. At that point, I wasn't thinking anything about education elements. That came about as a result of the 90-day plan. But since that 90-day plan came out, and we announced it in the end of July, I think, strategic planning was going to be something that we worked on this school year as a big goal. And it's probably the biggest goal of that list, to be quite honest. So I do think it's something that we need to get started on if it's something that we're going to move forward on. But I also understand it is a significant amount of money.
okay.
If I understand correctly, their pre-work is really this stuff between now and Christmas, right? This is sort of getting it started.
Yeah.
If we had waited until December 12th, you now lost 2 weeks. And you guys are ready to probably start tomorrow. I'm joking.
We're ready.
But the point would be is anything we can do for the holidays pre-work is going to be very good for that perspective. I think what we can do afterward is talk about the board's engagement, how we're going to engage. And maybe the argument is we go through we involved in the ratification component such that if something's not headed the way the board feels, we can pivot and go a different direction. And that might be the best way. So I think we probably should have a discussion on our terms of engagement, whether we want to do it in a work session or something like that in a subsequent, for early in January board meeting, we could do something like that and think about how we want to do that rules of engagement. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
So these final decisions come in front of the board before they're made.
As we go down paths of certain things, we'll make sure it's headed in we got enough information on all sides, not only from your summary material, but also from,
We would want to do one per phase. So you would be involved at every phase.
But to the extent there are subcommittee groups meeting, just like we did tonight by having the head of human resources and the head of secondary education, I think it'd be helpful for those on the strategic side of that to come to this board regularly and say, hey, we're struggling with this piece, or hey, this piece is going great. And I think that might be a better way to sort of get the flow of information than just putting it out there.
Okay, any other comments?
I was gonna say, I appreciated having this as part of our weekly update so that we could have time to reflect on it and anticipate your presentation tonight. So that was very helpful to be able to think through some of those things and talk a little bit with Mrs. Hathaway about the meeting. So I appreciate that work ahead of up front.
It would, regardless of when this happens, it has to involve us coming back to you throughout the process and reporting on the work that's happening and the data that's being collected. This will be something that we discuss publicly throughout the entire process, regardless of when it starts or who we're working with. It has to be that way for us to get buy-in from the community. So I think for you, it becomes a matter of when do you want to be involved in that process in terms of when we get ready to do that pre-work and development of the steering committees and things like that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. We ready to vote? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carried. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll move into the business report with Mr. Mallers and Mr. Bash.
Okay. First tonight, I have an advertisement for bids for our wide area network expansion. If you recall, this is actually something that went out for bid in the past, but we did reject that as those bids came back to lease versus replace the network. So since then, we've worked with primary engineering to come up with a new design that we feel is ready and able to go back out for bid. And this will be something that we still are using the series 2018 bond money for to complete, because that was what it was originally proposed. So I do recommend the advertisement to take bids on the wide area network expansion as presented.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Summers, second by Mr. Barkus. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
All right, the second item I have for you tonight is the sale of the surplus tech equipment. We did take bids for that on November 16th at the tech office. And after going through the bids, CDM Technologies was the high bid for our items at $69,693.90. And I recommend the sale of our next surplus technology items as presented.
Motion by Mr. Barkus. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Slaughter. Any discussion?
That money goes with operating fund. Thank you.
All right, and finally, we have.
Any other questions? Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Sorry about that.
okay, no
All right,
problem.
and finally, we have a fundraiser to add. This one kind of just was a new recommendation that we had for Aspen Meadow. So I would like to recommend that additional fundraiser as presented.
Do we have a motion?
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Slaughter, second by Mr. Barkus. Any discussion?
So where are we putting this boulder?
I do not have the location of where the boulder is going, but they are going to put it out to be seen, and my understanding is painted for celebratory purposes, which is actually a fairly common thing in some other schools apparently. So
Let's make sure our engineering folks take a look at it, make sure we're not like crushing a
yeah,
drain
Sewer
line or
line.
something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Make sure we have the padded, we have a proper pad for it so we don't talk about a sinkhole in 5 years.
Yeah. Any other comments? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Basham.
I do have grants and donations to present to you, Mr. Felger, and board members. Have a Perkins assessment grant in the amount of $861.75. Request permission or permission to accept the funding for the career and technical education programs at Carroll High School and recommend approval. And sorry, I got one more. A donation from the Indiana Interscholastic Cycling League. And this is in the amount of $505.50, and that is in support of the Maple Creek Mountain Biking Club. Recommend approval.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Barkus, second by Mr. Summers. Any discussion?
Is that Perkins grant used for education for our Project Lead the Way folks?
It can be. It's for certifications that they're able to obtain, and there are some specific Project Lead the Way certifications that can be obtained. There's also other licensing areas. For example, and I'm not saying this is what it's used for, but like culinary will get serve safe certifications,
Yeah.
Various things like that that are involved with all career and tech programs.
Do we have any other mountain bike clubs?
Just one.
Or just Maple Creek?
That's correct. And it was started by Dr. Toller and continues with his leadership.
Cool.
My hope is to do 6th through 12th grade next year.
I think it's great to see other activities that our students can be involved in.
I picked up a friend's child from that one afternoon, and they were playing tag on their mountain bikes out here in the yard, and it was one of the most interesting things I've seen our students do, but they were having a blast. It was so cool.
These aren't battery operated, are they?
No.
Okay, just checking.
You still
Those
trying?
get pretty
You still
expensive.
trying to buy one?
Yeah, those get really expensive. I've looked into those.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller, Dr. Fuller, for
Any other?
You need batteries.
Any other discussion? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
And finally, I do recommend approval of claims and payroll subject to audit.
Okay, do we have a motion?
move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Slaughter, second by Mr. Barkus. Any discussion? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
That concludes the business.
Thank you, Mr. Mallers. At the communications report with Ms. Downey.
I have two things to share with you this evening. We'll see. First of all, actually, they both pertain to Huntertown. It's been around a little while. We're looking at a 100-year celebration upcoming on Saturday, December 10th from 10 to noon. You're going to see the doors open. We're going to have some sort of historical people who've been long-termers and maybe retired from teaching or administrating or been featured students over the years, and we'll have some memorabilia on display. We really would love the whole community to come and check it out, tour it, see what's changed, what hasn't changed. We'll have some things on display. If you have stuff, let me know. We'd like to borrow it. We did find a really interesting jersey that we're gonna try to put out and have available as well. So there's gonna be some fun stuff around that. So that Saturday, 10 to noon, 100th anniversary of Huntertown education, because it's not always been an elementary, as we well know. So look for some trivia upcoming on that. So that's item number one for me. The second item has to do with a family you may be familiar with. Earlier this summer, we had a student pass away from Huntertown. She was a 5th grader. Her name was Lucia Salazar, and she loved to read. It was an unfortunate accident, unexpected, and the family clearly devastated, but the students got together from Huntertown and wanted to do something to acknowledge this child and her contributions to just the school community. And they connected with Kate's Heart, which is a local nonprofit. kind of interesting because Kate's Cart actually has ties to Huntertown and to this district. The founder, back in 2008, had lost her 18-month-old daughter, Kate, who would this year be a sophomore at Carroll. It's kind of neat because now her child would have gone to Huntertown where this child left. Now, the mother is a nurse and ended up, she's familiar with Kate's Cart. For those of you who don't know what that organization is, they donate, they take books that they get from donated purposes and events such as this, and they give them to hospital and healthcare facilities for children who are in need and or just in an environment that's unknown about. So I have a couple short interviews just to share that story a little bit. Huntertown ended up presenting over 500 books to Kate's Cart, which was enough to fill one of her full carts. And then the students at Carroll Middle caught wind of it late in the game, and they donated too, because a lot of those kids were her classmates. So it was kind of, they donated some cash also from Carroll Middle. So I'm going to enlarge this, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Here we go. It always tests fun. I swear we check it every time.
I've been really thankful for Huntertown. They continue to remember her and in this case, but not only honor her, as they always say, once a walk, always a walk, and so this definitely brings this on.
In your words. Yes. So what's the significance of Kate's Cart to you?
I'm a nurse in emergency room, and I took this books to the kids in the hospital that are nervous about being in the hospital, so I get to see that joy that love brings. So that's one of the reasons that we decided to do Kate's Cart, because we wanted to continue spreading that joy and remembering Lucia by the joy of living to others.
15 years later, we're in 22 hospitals, 37 carts, giving out about 4,000 pieces.
And so tell me kind of the connection now that you have to the people that you most recently helped out with the cart. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so probably one of the most honoring and humbling gifts that we receive from this Kate's Cart is from families who have lost a child themselves. And so we were just truly honored that the Salazar family chose Kate's Cart to remember their daughter Lucia. And the community is just totally rallied around her, around that family. We've received many cash donations as well as books from Parkview Huntington, where Ms. Salazar works, as well as Huntertown and Carroll Middle School. So it's truly heartwarming for us to really partner, and that's how I think of it, as a partnership between two hurting families to just brighten the day.
So, you know, finding some positive out of a tragedy like that is, I think, one way that demonstrates the heart of NACS and who we are and the way we operate as a community. So I just thought it would be appropriate to share that story. I know we've had a lot of positive exposure for other students in the past, but this one was kind of touching, and I liked how the two organizations were able to work together for the benefit of the greater good. So thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Okay, board comments. Do any board members have comments this evening?
Yeah, I would like to congratulate Coach Dinan, the assistant coaches, all the student athletes, everyone associated with the Carroll football program. who was dealt an insurmountable tragedy this summer. And how that team stayed together like they did was incredible. And I just want them to know how proud it made this entire community.
I would echo those sentiments of Mr. Summers. And I thought about that team, and I wanted to congratulate them on making it clear to the state finals. But even more than that, I'd like to congratulate them on the way they represented not only Carroll High School, but our whole community. And that character and integrity will have a lasting impact, just as much as having made it to the state finals as a team. So I'm really grateful for that, for his leadership, for our players, and the way that they carry themselves on and off the field. It means a lot. I want to also wish our Arcola Lego League team the best of luck. They go to state on Saturday, December the 10th at the University of Indianapolis. I think last year they were within a couple of points of making it to nationals. So I know they have this big hope and dream of potentially qualifying for nationals. So we'll see how that goes. And lastly, I did want to share that before our next meeting, Mr. Felger has been so incredibly humble about not wanting any recognition for his service. We are going to have an open house at 5 o'clock in the cafeteria. And I just want to personally thank Mr. Felger for affording us the opportunity to be able to have time to get to tell you thank you. So for people within the public, if they would want to come early and share words of gratitude or just anything with Mr. Felger, there'll be opportunity for that prior to our next meeting. So thank you for allowing us that.
Okay, thank you. You can call me Ron.
Yes, thank you, Ron. I think it was pretty neat seeing a lot of the old football players that I knew from high school 30 years ago wearing their jerseys. My brother-in-law had his jersey on at Thanksgiving. I thought, where the heck did you dig that up? He had it hanging in his barn.
Yeah.
And just seeing some of the Facebook posts and the old Carroll nostalgia has just, came out of the woodwork just because of what our team has done. Pretty cool.
Okay. Okay, superintendent's comments.
I know there were some conversations in a neighboring school district concerning Arcola and Lake Township no longer being a part of Northwest Allen County Schools potentially. And I know that's caused some unrest, and I just want to personally go on record and say that I have zero interest in that happening. I consider Arcola and Lake Township to be Northwest Allen County Schools, and personally not interested in us working to do anything that changes that. I think it's impossible to look down the road as to what is going to happen in a school district, but to think that really we're a fairly young school district and to where we could be 50 years from now. I think will look very different than what it does now. But I would have zero interest in us doing anything that changes our boundaries, certainly. Would echo the comments related to the football season. It's been magical to watch what happened in spite of just an awful circumstance and how they rallied together and their leadership, the way they responded in interviews with students, just amazing. Just amazing. What a tribute to their families they have been, to our school. We're just certainly very proud, and to be down there Saturday and experience, or Friday, I should say, and experience the crowd that we had, that sea of orange behind our team was amazing to honor Owen in orange. And that was just an amazing experience to be a part of. Like Christy, I'm glad it took some arm twisting on my part too to get Mr. Felger to allow us to do a reception. So I'm glad he's succumbed to that. You can tell he doesn't even want us to talk about it. Finally, on just a different note that probably doesn't get discussed in many board meetings, I have actually discussed it before. We have a mattress fundraiser happening this Saturday with our Carroll Band program, and that may sound strange, and you approved it here a while back, but I've seen those be really effective. So if you know someone who has a need for a mattress, that's a great way to do it from a source that also benefits our Carroll Band program. So hope to see a big crowd out there for them this Saturday from 10 to 5. I think you have at your board seats some flyers on
Their
that.
website they go to right now?
Not sure.
There's a QR code you can scan.
I mean, that the public could go to, not so much that I need a mattress, but anybody in our community.
You can text Carol to the number below also and get additional information.
Okay, text Carol in capital letters, yeah.
Yeah, it's a 765-244-6229.
Okay, is that it, Wayne?
That's it.
And I knew you were going to comment on the Lake Township Arcola situation, and I had some communication initiated by a board member to a Southwest Allen. Wasn't really clear to me exactly what they were wanting as far as, collaborating, but it, eventually it looked to me like what they wanted was for Northwest Sound to maybe seed somehow with some type of monetary transfer, I think, our district south of Highway 30. On June the 28th, I sent a very abrupt email that said that just was nothing that we would be interested in entertaining. And as far as I'm concerned, or at least as far as I know, that whole discussion is dead, and they never got back with me. So I think that's something the board and the community needs to be aware of. But I know that there has been, discussion down in Southwest about that has spilled over. And so anyway, I shared my email exchanges, and I guess they're available to the public if you want to share them to the public. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on that. And I don't know if our Lake Township representative wants to comment on it or not.
I very much appreciate the public comment, and there have been rumors. I think they resurface from time to time, but it seems as if the last 6 to 9 months they've been more so. So I appreciate your frank communication with the neighboring district, making it clear that we have no desire to even have conversation about that. And Mr. Barker, I know that people will really appreciate your public comment tonight as well, just to be able to know where the board stands.
Well, like Mr. Barker said, I mean, you can't envision what may happen 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And so, I mean, I just think that would be a very, very short-sighted idea to implement. So that's my 2 cents on it. Any other comments? Okay, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Barkus, second by Mr. Summers to adjourn. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you for coming.